What is it with the liberal obsession with the other, the need, the constant reminding of an approval, of this insatiable requirement to be accepted by the other? Why is it so pathological? So this is a question that continues to reoccur for me because every time I'm bombarded by media, by political machinations and opinions, it's always the case that there's a balance. There's this DEI, there's this diversity BAME requirement from opinions so that every single Western country has to be bombarded with these people's thoughts and opinions on Western society. So what has been the reason, what's the case for this entirely, that we've gone from having what is fairly homogenous society to now having a very heterogeneous and you could say heterodox society around thoughts and things and feelings. Spengler, this was written about 100 years ago almost now in Hour of Decision, notes that several of these factors have just come home to roost, so to speak. He starts by saying, the position of the present imperium of the white nations, which embraces the whole globe and includes the colored races, is far more difficult. While white humanity has scattered itself to all quarters in its ungovernable urge to the infinite distance, over both Americas, South Africa, Australia, and innumerable strategic points in between. The yellow, brown, black, red menace lurks within the field of white power. It penetrates into and participates in the military and revolutionary agreements and disagreements of the white powers and threatens one day to take matters into its own hands. And in this he could foresee what would become a recurrent theme, I think, in that once you pull back the veil and you give a look into how things, let's say, how the pie is made, it doesn't strike anyone as a particularly difficult or complex process. And this disregards, obviously, millennia of a fine-tuning and intuition and these very slight, almost imperceptible notions around what we view as freedom, as liberty, and even something as notionally simple as democracy. These become seemingly very simple terms, and you go into this contract, this place where you are able to agree with other citizens and how to behave in a society. But because there's a liberal, you could say pathological need to be accepted, to be open-minded, to be agreeable, then what you are left with is the floodgates being opened and then no limitations in the name of tolerance. And you can see here just a heat map of the in-group, out-group preferencing, and that if there's a certain degree that the liberal who is much more predisposed towards hearing and accepting those who are not similar to them, then this is how you can get to society which looks like this one does, where everybody who has any notion of what the West needs to be doing or shouldn't be doing or needs to fix is not actually Western at all. We're being lectured and hectored by the alien, by the other. And you can see that all the way from what was the Biden administration, which looks like a UN meeting, into the UK government's somehow party leadership and senior positions, just into the normal commentariat political divinations of what even here in Good Morning Britain is not a single actual Englishman on an entire panel discussing English news and stories and current affairs. So the state has obviously gone from being what is, I would say, considered a diversity of thought, was the preeminence of the day in, say, like the 60s and the 70s, to just how superficial can we make diversity such that we can represent every color, not white, on this in this system, on commentary, on almost every single platform that you can think of. Now, this goes into the pacifistic leanings, or even the preference for pacifism as a ideology by the liberal mind. It's that anything I can do to secure my own peace, the appeasement, the capitulation of all that's good, such that I'm not threatened, I'm not in danger. I will sacrifice everything up until I'm no longer capable of sacrificing anything, because that's what I want to do to secure this peace. And this is what you get from a John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau-based society. You have very idealistic leanings, even in the Jeffersons of the day, saying that all men are equal before the law. This just is not true. It's demonstrably not true, and it's only wishful, hopeful thinking that it was. We have glorified this nonsensical passion for peace up into a degree of awarding it to people who are even warmongers in general. This is how absurd this entire visage, this facade has become. It is so perplexing if you're not, if you weren't there, say, to see it transform over time. If you've just been dumped into what is 2025 and you go, okay, why are all of these ostensibly Western Occidental nations built by Europeans being told what to do by all of these people, or even in reference to discussing it with them? Not one of these people is Western. So what is it about their opinions that I should care for? Why am I being hectored by people who have no say into this? There's no skin in the game for them. They can move home when they don't like it, when everything goes terrible because the places they're from are terrible and they've moved here to make our places terrible. They move home to their terrible place and ours stays, terrible, or it gets better and then they come back? How is it that this is supposed to function? What's the actual sane outcome here other than just infinite immigration or infinite opinions from people who have no burden in society and improving what they have? And the gestation of this, the place it was born, the seeding of it came out of something like this liberal, here this is specifically the Reform Club, but these liberal institutions in the Anglosphere, and particularly in the UK in the 17th, 18th centuries, which were obsessed with this idea of at that point in time, it was Christian ethics to a large degree, but this idea of this progressive liberalism, whereby the better you treat everyone else, the better in respect to that they will treat you, and that the world is more propitious, and it's a much more nicer place to live, a bit more like Thomas More's Utopia style, where if everyone has everything that they need and we can all treat each other airy-fairy lovingly with all the kind and careness in your heart, because that's what a good Christian would do, then this is what you get. You get reciprocation of this feeling that everyone's in this now very pleasant, halcyon utopia. It's obviously not the case. Humans are humans, and they'll fight each other to the death over things that are irreconcilable. That's just who we are, and that's just our nature. But to have to pretend, and we come to this pretense that we're no longer a power, we no longer have to strive for this. And this is why it's obviously refreshing with people like Trump, who will just stand there fixed and say, look, this is my country, it was built on the backs of my forefathers, and this is the stand I'm going to take. I'm actually going to draw sand in the line now and say, enough is enough to a degree. Now, I don't think he necessarily has or advocates a lot of the same positions that I do, given that his metaphysical philosophy is fairly limited to his own intuition, but at the same time, and the same token, it's still in the same direction. The compass is pointing to that way, is to say there's going to be a rebound effect here, where the blood memory of all of our generations of men building these places that everyone wanted to migrate to was because of our own mental acuity around how we wanted society to look, what we wanted to establish it on. And Spengler even calls this out further in Hour of Decision by saying, it was not Germany that lost the war. The West lost when it lost the respect of the coloured races. The importance of this shift in the political centre of gravity was first realised in Moscow. In Western Europe, it is still not realised, which is still true today, I think. The white ruling nations have abdicated from their former rank. They negotiate today where yesterday they would have commanded, and tomorrow they will have to flatter if they are even to negotiate. They have lost that feeling of the self-evidence of their power and are not even aware that they have lost it. In the revolution from without, they have ceded the choice of the hour to America and above all to Asia, whose frontier now lies along the Vistula and the Carpathians. For the first time since the siege of Vienna by the Turks, they have again been put on the defensive, and they will have to commit great forces, both spiritual and military, into the hands of very great men if they intend to weather the first mighty storm, which will not be long in coming. And his prescience here is obviously astounding, because it's specifically and adroitly addressing these issues in that way. To say, if you have, and this is the Asiatic force he calls in Russia, that Russia has pulled off its facade, its veil of the white man, and actually resumed its Asiatic will to power. But in saying that, it's the way that we structure how we understand into both international relations and domestic politics now that we have had this forced migration upon us. It's to say you have the internal fifth columns now, and this is all they represent. It's the irreconcilable mental states of some people who have an allegiance, an alliance to a home state, an ethnic clause, a tribe that isn't the place that they're living in. It's just the civil society that they happen to choose to live in currently. And so when you have that, there is going to be a cognitive dissonance around how things and how they feel they should be treated. It's to say they want all the privileges of the person whose history and whose legacy has built that country, but then they also want their own ethnic minority privileges that they get from being what is the other. So say, because Western society treats the other with more respect than is necessary, more undue and outdone recourse, then it is to say that they want that and they want their cake. It's this double barrel effect of wanting best of both worlds, and we've been giving it to them. That's the ironic part here. They get to be both the model minority, but also they get to go home and be the showcase for what can become the great Asian in the West, or the great African in the West, or the great South American in the West. It's how we've been able to grow this perception that we're the prime goose ready to be cooked on Christmas. It's such a simple and easy task to manipulate us because of how trusting and how tolerant we are. It's an embarrassing farce that we've actually let it come this far, and it would be probably quite horrific if it wasn't so banal, if it wasn't just this iota of increasing immigration just every year, slowly till we boil the frog. And that's what you get. You have this idea that we're supposed to be this coherent, homogenous, monolithic society of the West, when all we're doing is splintering it inch by inch, and death by 1,000 cuts is still going to be a death that's not going to be very pleasant to live through. So the embrace here, and this is how Spengler says it, a great force, both spiritually and militarily. This is how great men have to think, is that this is not a battle that can be won necessarily on a field against an army that you know. If half your forces, and this is what the case was for the Roman Empire at the time, if half your forces are Gauls or Germanics, fighting Germanics, then you don't really have an army that's going to be very loyal to you for very long. And hence why you did get the complete and utter destruction of the Western Roman Empire. You can't rely on these aliens, these other, to come in and help fulfill the spiritual needs of your society. It's impossible. But if you want to fix it, if you want to have some redress here, then it starts today. There has to be some form of your mind and soul that has to say no more. I don't want to be lectured, I don't want to be hectored, and I will not abide by all of these others telling me how to feel and think and what we should be doing. It's going to stop.